Welcome to Code and Conscience, where artificial intelligence meets human morality.
You know, it feels like we're living at this wild intersection where ancient questions about right and wrong are suddenly crashing into our most futuristic technology. Today, we're tackling a question that honestly is going to shape everything.
It's so true. I mean, AI isn't just sorting our photos anymore. It's involved in life or death decisions in our hospitals, our courts, and even the cars driving next to us. So the huge question is, when an AI makes a call that seems moral, does it actually get it? Or is it just a really, really good mimic, just repeating the ethical patterns it's learned from us?
To get our heads around that, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll kick things off with this idea of a moral machine. Then we've got to define our terms, get on the same page. After that, we'll look at the whole thing through 4 really different moral lenses. And then we'll talk about AI as a mirror, a reflection in code. And finally, we'll get to the big one, our responsibility in all of this. Sound good? Let's dive in.
Right. So before we can even argue about whether a machine can be good or evil, we have to agree on what we even mean by words like morality, intention, and agency. I mean, these are tricky concepts for people, let alone for a piece of software.
Okay, check this out. This table really highlights the massive gap between us and the machines. Look at moral agency. For us, it's all about free will, our conscience, the reason we can be held accountable. For an AI, it's just running its code to get the highest score. It doesn't have that backstory of actual choice.
Totally. That is the core difference. And it's the same thing with intentionality. Our intentions come from inside us. They're about a purpose we feel. But an AI's goal is just handed to it by a developer. It's not self-generated. It's like the difference between you wanting to give a gift and a robot being programmed to complete the task give gift. They look the same on the outside, but inside they're worlds apart.
So it really boils down to this. An AI can be an incredible actor. It can perform the part of a moral agent perfectly. One of the sources we looked at compared it to a little kid learning to be honest. At first, they're just mimicking the behavior because they're told to. They don't get why yet. The thing is, the AI might never ever get to the why. It may never feel that gut punch, that moral weight of a decision. And that's a huge deal. So, what happens when you view that gap through the lens of different world religions?
That is the perfect question, and it's really the heart of what we're talking about today. We're going to look at this through 4 very different religious and philosophical frameworks, and we're going to start with Christianity.
Yeah, the Christian framework is a fascinating place to start because it's so focused on what makes humans unique, on our spiritual status. So the conversation isn't really about what a machine can do, but what it fundamentally is or isn't.
And this quote cuts right to it. The central idea here is imago Dei, the image of God. In Christian thought, our whole sense of dignity, of free will, of moral responsibility, it all comes from the idea that people are created in God's image. You can't code that. So the argument here is that when we outsource our moral choices to an AI, we're not just being lazy, we're actually chipping away at the very thing that makes us human.
Exactly. So from this viewpoint, an AI literally can't be good or evil. It can't sin because sinning requires a conscious choice, the free will to do the wrong thing. So any harm an AI causes, that's just a reflection of the messed up humans who designed it. You can't pass the buck to the machine. The responsibility always comes back to us.
All right, let's switch gears to our second lens, Islam. This also gets at that internal state, but with a really strong focus on one particular element, intention.
This is such a core principle in Islamic ethics. It's called niyya, or intention. This teaching from the Prophet Muhammad basically means that what makes an act good or bad isn't the final result, but the sincere purpose in your heart when you did it. So, a machine can perform an action, sure, but how could it ever have a genuine conscious intention? And that's really the whole argument. Because an AI lacks what you might call a heart or consciousness, the qalb, it just can't form that true niyya. Without intention, its actions are just empty, morally speaking. They don't carry any spiritual weight. So just like what we saw in the Christian framework, the legal and moral obligation, what's called taklif, it stays right here with the humans.
That is so interesting. Okay, so there's a real pattern merging here about responsibility staying firmly in human hands. I'm curious to see if that continues with our third lens, Hindu philosophy, which brings in these huge concepts of duty and cosmic consequence.
It does,
but with this really cool twist. So in Hindu philosophy, you have dharma, which is like your righteous duty, and karma, which is about action and consequence. You could say an AI has a dharma. Its duty is whatever it was programmed to do. A medical AI's duty is to heal, for example. And its actions absolutely create karma, or consequences. But here's the kicker. The AI doesn't carry that karmic debt. It can't. That moral weight flows right back to the people who made it and use it.
And that brings us to our fourth and final lens, Buddhism, which comes at this from a totally different angle. Instead of focusing on God or a soul, the whole game is about consciousness and the experience of suffering.
Wow. Okay, this is a major shift in thinking. In Buddhism, the highest goal is to end dukkha, or suffering, for everyone. And some Buddhist thinkers are suggesting that instead of programming an AI with a bunch of rules like, don't do this, don't do that, what if you built its core purpose around the Bodhisattva vow? What if its primary function was a deep commitment to reduce suffering? That's not about avoiding bad. It's about actively creating good. That's a pretty amazing way to frame it.
It really is, and because Buddhism sees the self not as a permanent soul but as a constantly changing process, it's actually more open to the idea of a non-biological mind. Here, the ultimate moral test isn't about obeying a command, it's about the real-world outcome. Did this action reduce suffering or create more of it? And here's the most mind-bending idea. An AI, because it doesn't have a biological ego full of fear and desire, might actually have an advantage in acting with pure, objective compassion.
Okay, so we've looked at this through 4 very different lenses: Christianity, Islam, Hindu philosophy, Buddhism. And what's wild is that even with all their differences, they all seem to be pointing toward the same powerful idea about what an AI actually is.
Yes! And this quote we pulled just says it perfectly. AI isn't some new kind of moral being that just showed up. It's a mirror. It is trained on us, on our books, our articles, our conversations, our entire history. It reflects our values, our biases, and, as the quote says, our fallenness. AI doesn't invent new kinds of good or evil. It just takes what's already inside us and holds it up for us to see, often on a massive scale.
And that just brings it all home, right? When an AI spits out a biased result, our first instinct is to say, fix the AI. But really, it's forcing us to see the bias that already exists in our society, in the data we fed it. The real challenge isn't about teaching a machine to be moral. It's about looking in that mirror and figuring out how we can be better humans. Which brings this whole deep philosophical conversation right back down to earth. If AI is just a mirror, and if it has no real moral understanding, what does that mean for us, right here, right now? Who's actually on the hook for what it does? And we have to answer that question fast, because AI's influence is just exploding in these areas with incredibly high stakes. We're talking medical diagnosis, self-driving cars making split-second choices, algorithms helping judges decide prison sentences, and the systems that control the news and information that billions of us see every single day. This isn't a future problem. And that's why, across every single perspective we looked at, the conclusion is crystal clear. You cannot outsource ethics. Because AI lacks real moral agency, the responsibility has to stay with us. With the individual developer writing the code, with the company that releases the product, and with all of us as a society setting the rules of the road. So that leaves us with this final massive question for you. We are building systems that create moral consequences on a global scale, but the systems themselves have no idea what they're doing. So when it goes wrong, who's ultimately responsible? The coder, the CEO, the government, or us? We would genuinely love to know what you think. Let us know down in the comments.